Before you,
There we go. All right. Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you all so much for being here with us. My name is Joni Oldhoff, and I am the programs coordinator at Moms Against Racism Canada. We are a nonprofit that is dedicated to really brave anti-racism work within our communities and our homes. Um, I am an Indigenous woman. I am Cree, Métis, and Scottish mixed heritage. I belong to the Mitchell-Callahoo Nation. Um, Treaty 6 territory, and more specifically, our land base is in Edmonton, what is now colonially known as Edmonton and St. Albert, Alberta. Um, I'm a mom to two beautiful children. I'm an activist, advocate, and educator with a primary focus on decolonization and anti-oppression work. Yeah, I'm super excited and grateful to be here today. We are speaking with the ever deadly, relentless Indigenous woman, Candace Linklater. Thank you so much for being with us. Before we begin, I'm just going to take a moment to ground myself and in this space and in this time. I invite you all to do the same where you are. So, Mar and I am located on the stolen, rightful, and traditional territory of the Lekwungen, the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations. As a transplanted Indigenous person, it's my responsibility to ensure I follow suit, not only to respect these lands, but to protect them in accordance to their matriarchs, hereditary chiefs, knowledge keepers, elders, and community members. I'm endlessly grateful to this land and to its people for allowing me and my family to be here for many generations. I'm endlessly grateful to these forests, to these waterways, to these food systems, to these mountains, to this whole island. It's with my whole being that I recognize both my immense privilege and my responsibility to this place and to its people. So with that, I would like to welcome Candace Linklater. Woohoo!
thank
Round
you
of
much.
applause. Um,
Thank you, Joni.
yeah, thank you so much for being here. So let's start off and have you introduce yourself.
Yeah, for sure. Watch everyone. Candace Linklater, Nitishna Kaso. My name is Candace Linklater. I am from Moose Cree First Nation, the Treaty 9 territory, so the very northern parts of Ontario. I am currently living in McKinsey, also known as Calgary, Alberta, but I'm currently visiting Edmonton for a night market here with my fiance at not Red River, River Cree Casino. So we're here for the weekend and it was loud here yesterday. Are you in Edmonton right now?
No, I'm in
No.
Victoria. Yeah,
So
I'm good.
The Oilers won last night, and I could tell because like it was honking and celebratory noises outside for an hour, almost 2 hours. So it was really cool to like witness. I felt like FOMO. I'm not an Oilers fan, but I almost like leaned that way.
You're like, I want to hang.
I know it was amazing. So it was really cool to be here last night and during the full moon and summer solstice is just it's just a beautiful time today and yesterday. It's gorgeous outside too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I am Moose Cree First Nation. I am an educator. I'm also known as Relentless Indigenous Woman on social media, where I have quite the following where I educate and advocate on Indigenous issues. I talk about a lot of colonialism and healing in like usually half and half. I try to ensure that like I talk about systemic issues, but also the healing that needs to happen. So I'll be talking about pieces of that today. Also, yeah, I'm currently doing my PhD in education. I'm hopefully going to finish this year. Um, and my dissertation is on creating safe space for Indigenous to us LGBTQ plus K to 12 students, more so in Northern communities. And yeah, I love what I do. I own a consulting firm, which is what brought me here today. So I do talk a lot about, and anti-racist education, and how to walk in solidarity as an educator and how to best support students. So I'm really looking forward to the conversations today. I started this work when I was an elementary teacher on my reservation. I was teaching grade 3 and 4. And I was also doing my master's at the time, and I knew systemically that they were going to have it hard when they leave. And actually, I just saw some pictures of them yesterday. They graduated grade 8 yesterday, which is so cute. It is so funny to see them all tall, but they're getting older, and they're going to be coming into the world outside of the reservation within the next 5-6 years. And I want the world to be as ready for them as possible. And I don't just mean like being inclusive, but ready for their experience and their voice that is different than the status quo. I think that they deserve to be honored. And that's what made me create the Relentless Indigenous Woman social media page, to just talk about those issues. And then it grew. And now I'm here, and I'm currently, I'm finishing off my PhD. I'm currently writing a book that is on Indigenous solidarity. And just doing that advocacy work. It's ancestral work to me. It's community work for me. So it's not just about my business. It all roots me back home to Miigwech.
Nice. Yeah, thank you so much for that. I really relate to that feeling because I also, I feel like my advocacy work, my education work is also very much rooted in, in my culture. It's not just my job. It's like it's my responsibility, and I
Yes.
feel that way,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I also, when you were saying that you're seeing the kids that you had taught
Mhm.
from grade 2 or 3, I was a preschool teacher for many, many years,
Yeah.
and that was like, gosh, like 15 years ago now. So all the kids that I taught, I see now, and they're like going into high school. And I'm like, how? It's like by so fast, but it's wild to watch.
I
Watch
know.
the ones that we like, care for so long to get big.
Yeah, I'm taller than me.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So as you said, like we're here today to talk about creating creating learning environments that are not only inclusive, but are supportive to Indigenous students. And I think that it's important, I'm going to kind of sidetrack here. I think it's important for us to talk about what the difference is a little bit, because I think that there is a difference between being inclusive and actually having the supports in place. So in your own words, maybe you can give us, what do you believe is the difference between having an inclusive environment and a supportive one?
Inclusive environment is essentially being included in a Western framework.
Mm.
Indigenous peoples and our worldviews, we would have to, in a way, like assimilate, whether like it's said out loud or not, in one way or another. We'd have to like let go to be inclusive. And I wonder if I even want to be included. I don't really want to be included. I don't want to be included in those systems. I don't want my students to be included in those systems. I think that's just a very lazy way to really welcome Indigenous students. And it sounds nice and it sounds pretty and polite, but we're done with that now. We're done with the politeness. We're done with neoliberalism way of going about what diversity, inclusion, and belonging mean. That's just to make the settler frameworks okay with the status quo. Like saying, oh, well, we have like these EDI and whatever, but they're not willing to systematically look at the curriculum. They're not willing to like mostly look at like how they're training their teachers. Are teachers actually willing to look at the biases that they have? Like seriously, do they understand the land that they're on? Do they even know the nations that they're teaching on? Like truly, not just like, oh, I looked on a website once and I'm on so and so nation. Like, what do you know about it?
Mm.
What do you know about that nation? So like there's like this status quo, and it's making people just feel good about the laziness about it. Like reconciliation is so much more than like it's truth before reconciliation. And what folks need to realize is that truth will come with discomfort. So your ability to be within discomfort will be basically the amount of growth that you can go within like truth and reconciliation. So how willing are you willing to be uncomfortable? So when you're in those uncomfortable realms, what you really need to do is have compassion and understanding and empathy when you're in those spaces,
Mhm.
when you're in that discomfort.
Mhm.
It's not to make you stay there and be guilty. You need to have the tools and the resilience to be in that discomfort, because Indigenous peoples, we've been uncomfortable for years. We're
Mhm.
still uncomfortable
Exactly. Yeah.
because we have to like bend to the status quo. So inclusivity, I don't want to be included.
Mm.
I want to be honored as an Indigenous person. And what that means is, maybe, I don't know, a buzzword that where maybe people can start is looking at cultural responsiveness as opposed to inclusivity. Look at decolonial education, ways that colonialism is perpetuated in the school system, not just in the materials that we're reading, but the system, how it's worked out to be, like teachers are like the ones that know best. No, they don't. We don't. Communities do.
Yeah.
Children do. Elders do. That, like, we have all grown up in a system where teachers know best, like, quote unquote, but we don't. We're just here to facilitate their growth. We're not here to, be like dogmatic about things, like force certain ideologies. We're here to notice their strengths. We're here to facilitate their growth as humans and as people responsible to these lands eventually. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. That's really powerful what you said. Um, that, we don't want to be included because these are the same systems that have caused this type of harm. Like, it is not much different than how it has always been, and it's just transforming now with different words and different actions, but there's not the like real work that's being undertaken to really address. And a lot of the time, right? I was actually saying this to our founder, Carrie, recently. We were listening into an anti-racism talk, and I was saying, part of me feels like, how do we ever rebuild in a system that was already designed, like fundamentally
Yeah.
designed to not be a place for us to be thriving? Like, part of me is like, I'm very much kind of burn it all to the ground and start again
Yeah.
kind of person,
I am like a mini abolitionist, 100%. So like the way I talk and how I talk about things, it can make people uncomfortable, but I'm not here to make people feel okay. I'm here to help people grow. And truth does that. It plants seeds. It may be uncomfortable, but I'm not here to make people feel amazing about what they do. I'm here to challenge you because I know that you can do it. I know that you can go through the discomfort. That's what brought you here today. That's what brought you. You're curious about it. So to me, that already shows like that courageousness, but it may take some discomfort on your way. And that's just part of the growth. And I'm uncomfortable a lot of the time too, but you know, as Indigenous people, we just keep pushing. And I'm done with the politeness of these systems and how passive violence has shut us up.
Yeah.
And it's causing so much harm at the government level, at the corporate level. It does stuff to our bodies. It's intergenerational how we carry those traumas. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm done with being polite for the sake of being polite.
Heck yeah. I
Mhm.
100% agree, because and that politeness, right? That's white supremacy culture, right?
Yeah.
That is what upholds it, right? And so my elders always say there's a difference between being kind and being nice. And
Yes, I talk about that all the
yeah,
time.
yeah, right. And that
I'm
kindness
being nice. Yeah. Yeah.
kindness is truthfulness, and
Yeah.
sometimes that's not comfortable, right? And it doesn't feel good all the time. So thank you for saying that, because it's important. And I'm going to skip over some of the questions because what you had said is important about being uncomfortable. So this question is pointed more towards early childhood educators. So as an EC myself and somebody who's worked in with young people,
Mhm.
um, one thing that I hear ECs talk about a lot is that they feel this difficulty incorporating learning components around Indigenous justice, and in particular reconciliation and learning about truth and reconciliation, learning about residential schools. And mostly what I hear from them is that they're unsure about how to bring up these topics that can feel too scary to talk about or too dark. So what are your thoughts, first, on the feelings of those educators around how these things are hard to speak about? And then secondly, what's your advice for them in overcoming
Mhm.
this worry?
Yeah. I think that the teachers think of it as too scary and too dark. You'd be surprised at how resilient children are able to understand this. What my research has shown me, and what is being said time and time again, is because of teachers' passiveness on it and like unwillingness to put feeling into these topics, it dilutes the whole thing. So because they're not willing to be emotional with it, connect with it, be sad about it, be rageful about it, they would just be objective about it. You can't. You have to put in your feeling on it. So when you are uncomfortable, you have to navigate those feelings yourself. How, like, and not just within this context. This is why I talk about healing a lot. How willing in your own life are you willing to be compassionate in moments of rage? What is that rage teaching you? How willing are you to be compassionate in moments of sadness? What is your grief and sadness teaching you? Like all of these pieces all intertwine, it all connects, not in just this isolated issue. This takes deep healing, not just being in those teacher components, but how do you offer yourself compassion and empathy in moments where you're uncomfortable and angry? Because how, like, if you can't be there for yourself and create your own form of resilience, how are you going to lead that for our students? Because as a leader, I'm always told you go first. You go first. So all of this work too, I had to be uncomfortable. I had to be in my rage. I'm still in my, like, I still have feelings of rage. I still have grief. I still have sadness. But how I meet myself there, how I allow myself to be in those spaces without the shame, that is what makes me more resilient to have these conversations with you, because I've met myself there. I've been in the rage. I still am sometimes. It's not over. It's like a continual growth. So how willing are you to be in those discomforts of emotions? And it's, yeah, it may seem scary to like talk to children about it, but that's because you're scared. You're like kind of putting that on the students, and you're kind of like, I'm fine that teachers use that as like an excuse to not really talk about it at the depth that it is, that it will have rage, it will have grief, but also giving children those resiliency tools. And again, this is why you going first is important. Your healing in this whole process is important too. And not just within the realms of education, but how you deal with it in your own life, how you deal with rage in your own life, how you deal with grief in your own life, how you deal with any quote unquote negative. And I say quote unquote negative because what colonization has told us is that these are bad things. It's sin. It is not. It is a teacher for you. It shows you pieces of yourself that are in pain. Often those things are defense mechanisms, and it stops us from going inside. So that's why yeah, that's a lot of what my book is about too, is like like welcoming you to yourself so that you can show up best as somebody in solidarity, because you already went through that stuff within yourself.
I
Yeah.
love that. I really think that this is the next piece to
Yep.
equity work in general. This, I'm
Mhm.
actually working right now on a workshop, and it's all about that. It's a healing settler trauma is what I've named,
Yes.
because I think that a lot of the time folks don't understand that by being complicit and also by being benefactor, that there's trauma that comes with that, because there's a sense of guilt of like, I can't address this because I, first of all, I don't know how, and first of all, when I do, then I have to accept my responsibility there within, and that's
Yes.
really scary, right? And
Yep.
like, and I think that what, being in that vulnerable place, I think, is the next step for all of us. Like,
Yep.
we all know now, like, racism is bad, right? We all know we're at that point where what's the next step? How do we actually start to get better, right? And
Mhm.
healing is for sure. So thank you for saying that, because I think that's really important for teachers to consider, for sure.
And speaking of like settler trauma, and I'll just I think this part is really important, because what may happen at a subconscious level for folks is when Indigenous peoples were reclaiming our identity and we're reclaiming our culture, there's probably a sense of FOMO, or like missing out, for white settlers because they're displaced from their lands and their ancestors came here and like they're not on their land anymore. So like, and what white supremacy did was erase their culture, erase their way of getting to know the land, their natural way.
Mhm.
So what I would offer white settlers at any point in time, and I think this is why appropriation is so rampant, because they're like, well, I don't know who I am, so I'm just gonna like use indigenous ways of like connecting with the land. You're indigenous from somewhere, and your people had their own ways to connect to the land and be responsible for it. But what white supremacy did was it Christianized everything, right? So it took those away and made them sinful and demonic and all of that. Like it really, really did a number on white settlers. So I would encourage folks to figure out like where you're from and look at the culture before the Christianization of it, because that's where you could find some maybe practices or ways of knowing and being in this world that would be more in alignment with your blood ancestry. Something might, you know, hit something in you with if you hear a certain ritual song, or there's certain, I don't know, but I know it happens to me when I hear like the drum, or and I'm part Scottish and Irish too, so when I hear certain, you know, traditional music that way, something in my blood also like gets activated. So we all have our own blood memory and our own epigenetics, and I think it's really important for white settlers to figure out what that is, that way appropriate, being culturally, having cultural appropriate. I always want to say it's inappropriate because it is inappropriate, but cultural appropriation will diminish, because then they find out like who they are instead of taking from other cultures. They have a culture. You're
Mhm.
all indigenous from somewhere. Figure
Mhm.
out, find out who that, where that is.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've had to do
And
it,
there's not,
so you can go do it. We've had to figure it out. You
Mhm.
can do it too. Go
Mhm.
figure yourself out.
Totally, totally. And just because it's further back, right, that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And it
Mhm.
doesn't, like, we all come from somewhere. We all didn't just like manifest out of fresh air, right? Like, I 100% agree with that. And
Mhm.
I think it's a
Mhm.
really important next step for anybody who is an advocate, settler folks who are ready to take on that work. That is the next move here for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
So let's go back to talking about the school system and why this work and creating a space that is going to be supportive of Indigenous students is important now and always. So, what, in your words, why is this work important for teachers to turn their hearts and minds to?
It will help heal the land. It will help heal the land, because really like what indigenous folks like from everywhere have a responsibility to the land. And I think when they are more, when they're given that opportunity to be acquainted in that relational capacity, that connection to the land, it will create generations that have not like just this like polite way and greenwashed way of showing up for the land, but they actually connect with it. They have a like a relationship with it, because everything is connected. And I think what decolonial work does, what I know that it does, is it reconnects those pieces of us as humans to the land. Colonization took that from us. It disconnected us from our natural ways. It disconnected us from our rhythm, and our intuition as humans, and connection to each other. um, it's global work. This isn't just about like, oh, I get to like wear my regalia to my graduation. It's so much more deep than that. It is healing to the earth, for us to reclaim our ways, and for you know, non-indigenous peoples to help facilitate that, and for them to know like how they can connect with land in their ancestral ways too, prior to Christianization.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Um, and so when it comes to like, has we know right now that systemically teachers can encourage change in
Mhm.
their schools and they
Mhm.
can continue to advocate for Indigenous students. but where do they start just within their own classrooms, within their own
Mhm.
first steps? What are the first steps for them?
Land. It's
Land.
honestly so simple. Like it's so simple. It's land. It's reinforcing that something that kids already know, that we are all connected to land, that when you go out for a walk, like have conversations about like thanking the trees, or like putting their hand down and like feeling the earth and like what that feels to their body, but like being mindful of that deep connection, like hugging a tree. Like Western science is finally catching up to what Indigenous peoples already knew this whole time, that it calms our nervous system at a biochemical level. That's what earth does. So like everything is animate. Everything is animate. It's just how their consciousness just manifests differently. Everything is connected and alive. Rocks, water, trees, air, everything is alive. Moon. It's just has its own way of consciousness, but it does witness us. Trees, I forget what the word is, but basically like they're standing beings that like observe us as people. So when you're walking by trees, they know you're there. They're aware that you're there. They see you there.
Mhm.
So it just and I'm hoping to write some children's books that are for like ages 2 to 5, to help facilitate those conversations for teachers, um because that's what colonization did. It disconnected us from that natural instinctive connection that we do have with land. And I think that's what's missing, when we're trying to protect the land. I don't think it's just a matter of changing policy. You need to have that relational aspect behind everything that you do.
Mhm. Yeah, I think so too. I agree with that. And I think that for children, that knowing that they belong here and are
Mhm.
part of that,
Yeah.
and part of that larger picture of things is such a powerful thing for them to know and carry on. Imagine if we all knew that from such a young age and we carried on that wisdom, that knowing through the rest of our lives, right? Like I think that could transform all generations to come if we really implemented this way of being and thinking and doing.
And another way too, that where they could start like advocating for Indigenous languages to be part of the curriculum as well, or see if there's other language books that may be local, to where you are. Because what Indigenous language does, it derives from the earth. So a lot of our languages have, when we're talking about something, it's you in relation to that. So it's not an object that's like apart from you, it is a part of you. So like in everything is in relation to each other. So it does something to your brain. So when you're what English does, like to your brain, it disconnects you from everything, because it objectifies everything. It's not you and something, it's you. It's like you and the lamp. Me and the lamp are like, and that's a bad word. Okay, so not a bad word, but maybe not a really good, because me and the grass. So there's grass right in front of me. And it's like me apart from the grass, as opposed to me like with the grass. It's everything is in relation to each other, so it does something to your brain. So English separating the a lot of colonial language like French, Spanish, English, they disconnect us from the land. It's more objectified, whereas Indigenous languages, they connect everything together. Everything is one. So it also, so that's why it's not only important to like revitalize language, but what it does to your brain chemistry and how you perceive things. Language has the ability to change how we perceive things. So Indigenous languages creates that connection.
Mhm, mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's so important, and I really, really wish that was something that was more implemented here,
Mhm.
sure.
Mhm. Mhm.
There's so much richness to be had. Absolutely. Okay, so we know that statistically, Indigenous students are less likely to stay in the school system. And we also know that we are less likely to graduate. I didn't graduate. Stats Canada says something that that Indigenous students graduate high school at a rate of 63%, while settler counterparts graduate at a rate of 93%. And in Manitoba, the graduation rate for youth is only 21% for Indigenous youth. So before we really talk about, how do we make these spaces? How are we being supportive to Indigenous students? Let's talk about why. Why aren't kids staying in school?
I also have statistics to Victoria on reserve children from our previous year. They're nowhere near that. They're sitting between 0 and 10%.
Wow, for here in Victoria?
We're here in Victoria, and that's live statistics.
Yeah.
And that unfortunately is a reflection of a lot of the, not just our schools in general, but also the feelings of like the board and the people who are making at like decision level, right? And so, Candace, I would love to hear, why do you think that Indigenous students are leaving school and that many are not graduating from high school?
We're othered. We're othered a lot of the time. We are seen as, I think we're also like a reminder of the crappy things that white settlers have done, because when we like talk about like our ways and our ways of knowing, like it has like this, I don't know, undercurrent of guilt, but that's for another conversation. So what this is called, I would call this the push out phenomenon, not a dropout phenomenon. These systems don't, and it starts also with like teacher training. Look at all of the theories that you learned to become a teacher. They're all Western. All of the theorists, they're like 90% or 95%, I would say, they're all from a Western framework. So there's nothing really that truly creates a safe space for us. We're othered a lot of the time. There's a lot of folks that are going into teaching that may not have the capacity or compassion to hold Indigenous students, because they may have like their own issues that they're like putting on other students. Just microaggressions, just like what, I don't know, there's so many ways. Just feeling like left out a lot of the time. I remember being terrified when I went like from my reservation to go to grade 12 in this city, and I don't know, it feels scary. It's like we're not like we have to assimilate to the system as much as possible, and it erases like part of ourselves to survive. Many of us Indigenous folks, we have to put on this mask just to survive. I know I have to, I'm really starting to let that go now that I'm like getting older. I'm like, I don't want to wear this mask anymore. I am who I am. But a lot of us out of survival have to pretend and pretend to be something that we're not. There's not a lot of community either in schools, not real community, and responsibility and accountability, because real community has those two aspects. Otherwise, it's just a clique. Yeah, I could go on and on about that one, but it's one thing that I have a really hard time with is when I'm talking about these things, and then I say I like give like a toolkit or I give like a step-by-step. I mean, I could, but what happens is like, so like, this is what I think is happening, because I do the same. We want to know what's wrong as teachers. We want to intellectualize it. Like, okay, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. How can I fix it right away? But I think what harm that does is like you can't like work through why it's so scary for you to understand, like why this is so uncomfortable. What are you running from? I think when we intellectualize something right away, we're running from a pain that is there because we want to fix it. And I do that a lot of time when I'm going through a lot of grief right now. Hey, Watchy. Hi. This is why we do what we do. I love it when I see kids like in the background. They'll get it. They get it. They get things so much easier than us adults because we intellectualize everything. We want to pathologize things, want to put it in a box and say like, we'll do this and this and this. But I don't, I'm hesitant to do that for folks because I want you to really delve deep in why, like decolonial work is heart work. Look into what that is, like what decolonization really is. I'm not going to give you a step-by-step thing because that just, again, disconnects you from the feelings that you have to go through. And you're just going to have to be resilient and go through that, just like we do as Indigenous people. We have no choice but to heal and to go through it. So it's your turn.
Yeah, time to pick up some of the weight for sure. Yeah, and it on top of that, when you're saying that, it just reminds me too of like a workshop I did recently where I was telling folks that pretty much that exact same thing, that part of white supremacy is this need to fix things, and there's this need to solve problems, and you just like jump into it without actually taking the time to assess how you got there. Why are we here? How is this being experienced? Emotionally, spiritually, mentally, all of those kinds of things. We can't just jump into this solving part because we skip everything else, right? All the actual learning. So thank you for saying that, because it's, that's the truth right there.
I'm speaking with a next week. Is it next week already? This Fortune 500 company, and I think they want me to give them a checklist. I won't be doing that, and I'm going to be telling them why.
Good for you.
I'm going to be talking exactly how I'm speaking with you folks today. It's a necessary truth, and I think that's why this certain group, like their EDI group, know me, and I think they want me to like articulate it again because they know that the EDI function is so status quo, and I think they bring folks out just to challenge that more.
So let's talk a little bit about reconciliation and what that means in schools. That is, for here particularly, that's a really, really big thing right now. That's what everybody's being called in to do. There's all the reconciliation work is on everybody's tongues, if you will, which is good. But there's, as we were just discussing, there's a lot of preemptive work that needs to do, right? Like this is the after step. So in your words, what does it mean to incorporate the values, I'm going to say, of reconciliation into schools and into learning places in general? And what does it actually look like?
May I ask another question as well? How do you bring these discussions to the municipal table, like say at the district level?
So I'm gonna just say we're gonna have a Q&A session in about like 5-10 minutes or so for the last 10 minutes once my questions are through. So maybe we can just like hold it and we'll bring all these up because I think there's a few in the chat as well. Does that sound okay? Oh, sorry, you're on mute. Okay, awesome.
Could you rephrase the question again?
Yeah. So basically, we're just reconciliation in schools. And what is that, in your words, what does it mean to incorporate the values of reconciliation into schools? Because we're right now, again, we're seeing this as a really like hot topic, if you will. This is on everybody's minds, and there's so much, so it's like, there's so much of like, okay, how do we do this work? We're bringing in the language speakers, we're making these community connections, but there's more that needs to happen. And I think a lot of people don't really know what it looks like. So in your words, what does reconciliation in schools look like?
That's a loaded question, and especially the term reconciliation. I think I edited my website and my mission to actually omit that word, because although like I understand, like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I think they did an amazing work. I think the calls to action are right on target. But I think where we're at right now is truth. We need to have the truth in these schools. We need to have the truth about the history and the current realities of Indigenous peoples and how settler colonialism is the status quo right now, and ways and conversations with students on how to change that, because children and youth, they're very innovative, they're imaginative. So have those conversations to like help students become innovative about the future and what that could look like, because they have a lot more wisdom than we give them credit for, and they could help facilitate the systems. They're like how, like the time, like how much time being spent outside, like what exactly does reconciliate, like, you know, listen to them. Like let them lead too. Don't just let like adults lead the conversations, because we're just borrowing this system from the students. They're going to be in it next, and perhaps give them voice for how they can do it. But yeah, truth needs to be first in like reconciliation. And I think like one of my friends and I, we had this conversation the other day, and she's Blackfoot and Dene, and she also has a hard time with the word reconciliation, along with my other friend who's also doing her PhD, because what it kind of insinuates is that like we're meeting each other halfway, but it's the white settlers that need to do most of the work for this, because we've upheld our part of the treaty and our responsibility in this relationship. But settlers need to do their own work, and that comes with accountability and responsibility. There's a reason why like less than 15% of the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action, or I can't remember what the percentage is, but it's astronomically low after like 2015 was when it was created. There's a reason, because I think there's just too much politeness, unwillingness to look at how settler colonialism is the status quo and dismantling that. They're too comfortable with position and power and money. So you have to ask yourself, like, are you ready to let some of these go? And a lot of these, like Truth and Reconciliation, they're run by non-Native people, and non-Native people are given these positions to lead. Just because they read a book or like spent some time with Native people, that does not give you the right to have those positions. And I don't think there's enough vetting process for organizations to weed out pretendians as well. They also dilute the whole process of truth and reconciliation. So pretendians are people that just claim to be Native, but they're actually not. They dilute the whole process. But I think organizations and companies just write it off just to make themselves feel better without the vetting, because they're like, oh, we found this Native and like they're this and that, but they actually have no grassroots experience or responsibility to community. And that just has a checkmark approach. And I think pretendians, they're diluting the whole process, and it's a form of hurtful colonization, extreme hurt. It's an insult to those that actually have the intergenerational impacts of colonization. It's yeah, there's a lot that I could say about that one, specifically. To what to actually do, I don't know. Decolonize. It needs to be decolonized. It can't just be reconciliation, because reconciliation, I think, is just too polite, in my opinion.
Yeah,
we need the decolonization before that. You need to understand your power and privilege as a white settler on these lands, and your responsibility as a visitor here.
Yeah, Tapway, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that, you know, stepping into to decolonization is such an important aspect for teachers and educators too, because, and just like we were saying at the beginning, right? Like how do we incorporate those values in a system that never made space for it anyway? Like it was not made to be supportive to Indigenous people. It was never made to be inclusive to us. And so there's, when I look at these like statistics, I'm going, oh, well, Indigenous kids aren't staying in school. Of course we're not staying in school.
Yeah.
You know, of course we're not there. We were never meant to be there, you know. And I'm the first person in my family to go to college, and I never graduated. I did that all on my own. And I'm also the first person in my school not to be put into a residential school. Like I'm a
Yeah.
first
Yeah.
generation from that, right? So there was never a meaning, there was never a time where I was supposed to be where I am now. And so I had to, you know, with the help of my ancestors and with my people and my own self, I had to get there. And so, and I think that's the same for all Indigenous people. There's these intentionally built barriers. They're not manifesting out of thin air, right? Like they're here. And so, okay, we're gonna go on to a Q&A because I can see we're already almost 10 minutes to 11 because we are
Yeah.
having such a good time talking. So my last question for you before I go and I hand it off to other folks who have questions for you is, can you paint me a picture of what your ideal and dream scenario is for all Indigenous students?
Um, hmm. We're like, it's a flexible schedule where a lot of our classes are outside, and it's not like we're going with the season. So like we have school off in the winter time to be with family and share traditional stories. And school time would be like in the fall, spring, and part of the summer, when like just being the natural rhythm, like the natural rhythm of things. And where our elders are part of the system. They help with the discipline and help with the nurturing of the gifts of students. There would be no school building. There'd be no classroom and big lights. I hate big lights.
I'm
There,
autistic, so
there'd be there'd be no grades. It would just be a total like, I'm abolitionist, right? So like it would not look like what it looks like now. Music would be there. There's some countries that actually look like similar to what I'm thinking of. Some Asian countries are doing amazing work on really nurturing students and, you know, making sure they're well fed. We would learn how to harvest. We would learn financial literacy. We would learn law to protect ourselves. Like we would learn all of these things in school, so that we can best navigate. And I'm not saying like take away, you know, like what I see in comments all the time. They're like, well, colonization brought you roads and cars and blah, blah, blah. Like, no, it didn't. We could have done that too if we were all working together. As a matter of fact, we probably could have had a lot more innovation and technological advancements if Indigenous people were at the table this whole time. Like, this is like there's a lot more that it could have been expanded. But what happened was that greed got in the way of that process. So, yeah. It won't really look like my dream. It doesn't look like what it looks like now. It doesn't look like a school building. It doesn't look like grades. It looks like nurturing the gifts of students in not a classroom, in compartmentalized way.
Yeah, I love that because it sees all of the children as people and it puts them as a people first approach, right? And I think that that is so, so missing from for all kids, but for Indigenous kids in particular, it's missing because we are already dehumanized in society
Yeah.
and school reflects that. And I know for myself that that was definitely a key factor as to why I didn't stay. So we're gonna open up. Thank you so much for answering all of my questions. You've been so fantastic, and I just find you so inspiring. And I follow you on social media, and I'm just really grateful for the work that you do. So thank you. Hi. I'm gonna open it up now to the folks who are with us. Annavi, you had a question. Are you with us right now? I know you have your little ones with you, so.
I am.
Hi.
Sorry, yeah, there's 3 under 6 here.
Oh,
I find myself saying the same thing. So I work for Songhees Nation. I'm a Songhees Nation member, but I also have ties to Mamalelukwa and Tawasin and Liquito. So that's mainly on the island here, a little bit on the mainland in BC. And I started working with our education department. And then now I also am lucky enough to sit on our FINESC board.
oh, nice. I love
Yes.
finesse.
So I find myself saying a lot of the same things to our IED department, so it's Indigenous education. So they're supposed to be our allies within the system, but I find they are more of a barrier than anything, just in the guise of helping us. It's really hard to navigate. So I don't have any school board background, nor do I hold a degree. But with my previous and lived experience, I've earned 3 promotions within the last 6 months.
Amazing.
So now
Congratulations.
currently I'm the student success manager.
Yeah.
And I find myself saying a lot of the same things, like we need to build relationships first before we put these kids through assessments. There's still a severe distrust of school systems. And they throw all this jargon and assessments and pressure. And I find myself saying the same thing a lot of the time. Like, all of these children are only 1 and 2 generations out of residential school. And we need to work on relationship building first and making them feel comfortable within the school system. And in our local education agreement meetings, I find myself saying the same thing over and over and over again. And I feel like, I hate the word cultural safety training, but I feel like all teachers and school board members should go through. I also hate the word should should go through these. I was just wondering, how do you raise these points at the municipal level where they need to happen?
I would maybe start to see what the municipality has, if they have any language in policy right now regarding reconciliation. And because some people write that, right? Because municipalities were called to action. So see if there's anything written out. See if there's any reach out to their executive to see if there's any minutes that you could see regarding their plans to reconciliation, so that in your letters you can always refer back to what they have said in those meetings and hold them accountable to it. You could always what do you call it, quote the UNDRIP, which is very helpful, the United Nation.
Yes, I'm familiar with that.
Yeah, just for folks that may not know.
The distinction-based approach is also really hard at this level because it's supposed to be happening federally, but has not filtered down to the district level yet.
Yeah. That's my first thought. I'm always go to their minutes. I was on chief and council at one point, so you can see what their minutes are. Did they talk about these things, and then hold them accountable.
Thank you. I don't want to take too much of the question and answer time, but it's just it's hard to face these things on a daily basis and then see what it does to our children. So like I said, our literacy rates and our graduation rates and our attendance rates are terrible. And we have all kinds of programming where we are offering the nation, doing our side of the local education agreement, because essentially we're a nation purchasing a service from another nation, is the way it is for the Songhees children, because we're an urban Indigenous. So technically we don't really have any land. All we have is our tiny reserve. And we're not So we suffered from all kinds of exclusion and like reduced scheduling and no EA support. Like there's so many issues. And there's not much more we can do. Like we're holding our end of the LEA, the district is not upholding their end.
Yeah. Yeah. Quote them, see if they have any minutes to hold them accountable to. Yeah, that's my first thought. I hope that helps at any rate.
Thank you so much. Symbia, I know that you had asked if there was time for a question. Would you like to ask?
Yeah, so I just wanted to say hi to everybody. I really appreciate all the conversation that we're having. I don't know how like to put it into like a question per se, but I like just came from a disability conference, and which is always a very white led space, and really struggled with some of it because a big part of the topic that we were talking about was the framework around children with disabilities and like these family support centers that are happening, like that the new model that the province is trying to take. And I heard you, I felt a little triggered from the words that you were saying not using the word the word inclusive in language and around support. I worked with Inclusion BC. That's literally the name of the organization, and also struggled while I was there, right? There's a lot of that space has been championed by middle-aged white women because they had the ability to be in that space, because they had, usually there's two parents, there's, you know, a dad works and the mom can do and put their energy towards leading that conversation on a provincial and on a federal level, right? So then there's people like me. I'm a single mom, 6 kids, you know, 5 of which have some type of support need. There are some that are Westernly labeled as autistic and ADD and ADHD, and we won't go on that conversation because I already, you know, this is the work that I do too. Like I talk about inclusive education and about gifts and our belief systems on disability and on capitalism and all that. That's another talk another day. But I know that there's not enough of us talking about it either, right? And I know that, like, I don't know how to say this properly. I feel like sometimes when we're talking about that abolition, sometimes what we end up doing is we squirrel off somewhere with our kids, and we're not holding anything accountable to being supportive and to hold space and to create that, you know, like that space already belongs to our children. We already belong to the land. They belong to, like, we belong, and we know that. And without being in some of these spaces to say, like, hello, like, my kid does need support. They do need speech and language in order for them to develop language. I know that there's a space for some of those therapies. I know that there's, and I'm not all about like pathologizing everything that they're going through. I don't see it, but I also do see that there is some benefit to some of these therapies. I have nephews that are also labeled as autistic and watched with speech and language and watched with people who intervene with them to help them so that they could, you know, have an elimination system that they understood, and that they helped the parents, like my sister and her partner, be able to, you know, help them to go to the washroom, and now they're independent, right? And I've watched my daughter before, like I've had 3 or 4 of them go through speech and language therapy that actually developed language. I had kids who were pre-language and were getting ready to go into kindergarten, and no matter what we were doing, culturally, spiritually, everything, that it still wasn't going anywhere. And then when we did have some help, you know, it did open that up, and then it opened it up to so much more. And then reactive behaviors went down, you know, and some sense of belonging to other people other than our family started to happen for them. So I want to be in this space and also feel like I'm pushing, you know, and holding space for my crew and my tribe of the people here, and also see that there's, like, we're revolutionary in just the way that we're raising our babes, right? We are already doing that. The fact that we're alive, you know, I'm living up north. I live on the traditional unceded territory of the
Oh, you're muted, love.
just demonize everything. And I know that there's space for us to belong. So I'm just kind of trying to find, like, when I use the word inclusion, it's they have a mandate to do it. My kid deserves to learn and space held for them. And so I guess my question is, if that isn't the word we're using, what is, how do we see some benefits and give credit for those benefits that my family have been able to gain from some of those therapies that they did gain through that system? I'm not saying it's a good system in any way, shape, or form. You know, I've been in it. I work in healthcare. I was a nurse for like 10 years. Yeah. I'm still trying to find where I need to be and what feels good and comfortable for me. And I'm listening to you and listening to what you and Joni are talking about. And I feel like maybe some of my edge is gone, you know. And also coming back from that conference, I was reminded that I still have an edge. So I don't know. I don't know if any of this is making sense at all, but like, if we're not using the word inclusion, what are we using, and what are we using as the stuff behind it that we're looking to hold space for our kids with? Because I do see some value in some of the things that are happening there. And I know that when I'm in those spaces, I'm one of the only ones. I'm one of the only ones. Am I wasting my time? Or am I saying, hey, you'll need to understand that disability looks different than what you guys are talking about. And when we're talking about our value systems and decolonization and indigenization, we're bringing those value systems forward and standing in those to say there is a different way to look at this. And there's a win-win. Yeah.
For sure. Miigwech, thank you for sharing all that. I think it's not like the term, I'm like, don't use the term inclusion. What my problem is that there needs to be that inclusion. What I'm talking about is where a system doesn't need to be inclusive, where it's already by default offering those services, and it's already trained within teachers, where it's not othered. What I mean by not having inclusion is where, like, folks with gifts, folks that where it's already in default in our programming, in our way that we teach, that those folks are already nurtured properly, where we don't have to go for extensive resources, where it's already in the system already, where there doesn't need to be advocacy anymore, a world where it's already a default, where we're not having to push and push and push for children with gifts in these spaces. So that's what I meant. What I didn't mean was like inclusive, like, oh, don't include. Like, what I mean is like a system where that's the default, a system where there doesn't need to be inclusion, but I understand that this is already the road to that. And just the way that we are right now as a system, this is the first avenue. And maybe when your children are older, or their grandchildren and your grandchildren, will have a system where it's already the default, where we don't have to, fight so hard. And Mama, I just want to say, like, miigwech for fighting so hard for your kids. Like, I can feel that in your chest. I could feel that in your heart. So that's the world that I long for, and I'm sure that you long for, where they don't have to fight for this to be heard, where they could just be nurtured by default, where that is the system and it's not an other system. And I think maybe a term that you can use and look up for those, because what you said, there's a lot of white settler folks there. What I have seen is a lot of race to innocence, it's called, where white folks will use their disability as a thing to kind of like stop them from doing any work on the impacts of settler colonialism. So it's called race to innocence. Look that up. Go on TikTok. I love TikTok. There's a lot of conversation around that where white folks will just, yeah, well, I have a disability. Don't really like, that's my intersectionality. No, no, intersectionality at its core means like the like BIPOC folks fighting within a system. It has nothing to do with like where at its core it's disability. So look at race to innocence and call that, I won't swear, call that crap out in there. And if they do have a race to innocence tendency where they like wash themselves just because they have a disability, there's still settler colonialism that is still perpetuated, and it's dangerous in spaces where disability, where you know, Indigenous folks by default in our systems, you know, as people, that wasn't othered. They were gifted, they were placed in spaces where they were nurtured. So it wasn't like inclusion to us, it was already embedded in our worldview. And that's like the hope. That's
the value, the value and the sacredness of every being is already recognized within our system. And this is part of what, like when I go into spaces and talk about inclusive education, from my point of view, is I do talk about that. I challenge people, like the only reason why there is the concept of disability in the first place is because of capitalism. I was like, if we didn't live in a capitalistic society, disability wouldn't even be a thought. I know, because I am on like 5 or 6 different research projects. Part of what we do is talk about disability on that lens, and that there's no word in any Indigenous community that I've connected with that has a word for disability, but they do speak to their skills or their gifts. That so if they're a seer, the word in our language would be, and it would be about seeing, right? It would be about feeling, it would be about knowing, it would be about whatever it is, right? So in those spaces, I think what I was trying to get at is that, you know, where I'm at is talking about exactly what you're talking about, is the normalization and not pathologizing, you know, people's gifts, and understanding it from a different point of view. And it can be exhausting. Like I literally just got back yesterday, and then it's Indigenous Peoples Day, and I'm like, now I got to shift gears, and I'm exhausted, you know, and I think I where I was feeling triggered, it was like other people need, other of our people need to be in this space too. We need to be able to work together to say this isn't okay. It's not okay for anybody. And the more that we keep going in this direction, because it has been championed by white middle-aged women, our voices need to be heard too. Like I'm exhausted being in this space sometimes because I'm unpacking, and a lot of the things that you're talking about are things that I'm turning around and sharing in these spaces too. So I think that that's kind of where I was going, was like, okay, if we're not going to use that word, but I get the concept of what you were trying to say, is that the way that we operate already in community is what we want modeled in a learning space, in a generational leadership space, because that's how we learn. Like think about tribal and village society. That's how we were learning, alongside our cousins, alongside our brothers and sisters, alongside our aunties. You know, we understood that that's where we learned. So thank you for sharing that, and thank you for that recognition and holding space. I think it's important work that you're doing, and thankful that, you know, we could ask, or we could have discussion. I appreciate that.
Thank you both so much. I'm just aware of the time here. We've gone a little bit over, so I'm going to say our goodbyes now and let everybody go on with their weekend. But I thank you so much, Candace, for being with us. This has been so amazing for me, I just love to connect with you and hear your thoughts. And again, I find you very inspiring, and I'm just really grateful for your time and for everybody who joined us and all the conversation. Like, it was nice to see all these like amazing people in the chat too. And so, yeah, thank you all so much. Please make sure that you check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and you'll be able to watch this video again. It'll be uploaded onto the Martalks YouTube page at a later time. So thank you all so much. Thank you to Candace, and have a wonderful rest of the weekend, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.